Listen, ordinarily we don't like to comment on the case, but I have an obligation to respond to something that Attorney General Garland wrote. Attorney General Garland wrote, he's promised Justice Department employees would show the American people by word and deed Justice Department adheres to the rule of law, follows the facts in the law, and pursues equal justice under the law. I assume here you can take off your masks?
Do it.
Okay.
It's a free country.
There is nothing about this case that reflects a pursuit of the equal justice under the law. This thing was a scam from the beginning. The committee that was convened here was convened exclusively of people who have made prejudgments and announced them publicly. The chair of the committee sued President Trump personally, and before he was even appointed to his position, determined and put in writing that President Trump was responsible for the events of January 6th. This is not an investigative committee. There's nothing for him to investigate when he's made a prejudgment. We have other members of the committee who announce their prejudgments well in advance. It's not equal justice under the law, Mr. Garland, to charge a matter like this criminally. The holder of the privilege in this case, executive privilege, invoked the privilege. Mr. Bannon is a layperson. When the privilege has been invoked by the purported holder of privilege, he has no choice but to withhold the documents. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. Mr. Bannon had acted as his lawyer counseled him to do by not appearing and by not turning over documents in this case. He didn't refuse to comply. He made quite clear that if a court ordered him to comply, he would do that. But he had an obligation to honor the privilege that was invoked. And in terms of prosecuting this criminally, it violates settled Department of Justice policy that's binding on the executive branch. It is outrageous that a criminal charge was brought in this case. It is a misdemeanor, but it's being treated as if it were a capital case. Mr. Bannon takes this very seriously. It's outrageous what the government did. The principles of equal justice under law that Mr. Attorney General Garland speaks about are vitally important to all of us. And we all lose as Americans when they're selectively used and when we violate that principle.
You see these signs right here and the guys over here saying insurrection and all that? That's what this country's about. It's freedom of speech. They got their opinions. We have our opinions. Okay? Hang on. They have their opinions. I'm telling you right now, this is going to be the misdemeanor from hell for Merrick Garland, Nancy Pelosi, and Joe Biden. Joe Biden ordered Merrick Garland to prosecute me from the White House lawn when he got off Marine One. And we're going to go on the offense. We're tired of playing defense. We're going to go on the offense on this and stand by. By the way, you should understand Nancy Pelosi is taking on Donald Trump and Steve Bannon. She ought to ask Hillary Clinton how that turned out from them, okay? We're going on the offense. Stand by.
You should be outraged if he ever faced that possibility as an American. There is nothing criminal about any conduct that occurred in this case, and when we respond to Merrick Garland, we say apply the law equally. They don't have. Who else did they prosecute for invoking executive privilege in a criminal prosecution? Read the Department of Justice Office of Legal Counsel letters. It's unconstitutional according to their own opinions from some real luminaries, including, by the way, read the Office of Legal Counsel opinion by Eric Holder for the Obama administration, the Fast and the Furious case. This is unheard of, to force a person to violate the invocation of executive privilege. By the way, I mean, the court, of course, hasn't ruled yet in President Trump's case, in Trump versus Thompson, on whether executive privilege applies. But even beyond that, the Office of Legal Counsel opinions make clear that it applies to discussions with former government officials, and that makes sense. It makes sense because we often see former officials kept in the loop that the president needs to consult with. And whatever you happen to think President Trump talked about at the time, that's what executive privilege exists for, so that people can speak freely with the president, talk about strategy matters, and talk about national security and other important matters.
By the way, not just Trump people and not just conservatives. Every progressive and every liberal in this country that likes freedom of speech and liberty, okay, should be fighting for this case. That's why I'm here today. For everybody, I'm never going to back down, and they took on the wrong guy this time, okay? They took on the wrong guys.
Because he was instructed by his attorney not to show up in Congress. A layperson has to follow his attorney's advice, in my view at least. When he's faced with a subpoena, he doesn't know anything about legal process otherwise. He relies on a lawyer, and the lawyer gave the advice, and I must say, relies on the Office of Legal Counsel opinions, which very clearly say that he need not show up.
Did he get bad advice or what? I
No,
I don't
the
think
president asserted executive privilege.
There's no other choice. Once the privilege is invoked, what would the choice be? Show up and testify. And by the way, they asked to have members, if he were to testify, to have those people invoking the privilege, a representative of the person invoking the privilege, present, just to be able to monitor it and make an objection if a privileged matter came up. They refused to allow that.
By the way, if the administrative state wants to take me on, bring it. Because we're here to fight this, and we're going to go on offense. And you stand by. You see how we're going to go on offense, okay? Nancy Pelosi, Merrick Garland, Joe Biden, the whole, all of them.
What he means,
okay?
what he means by offense is we're going to challenge this affirmatively. We're going to fight to defend his rights and to defend your rights also.
Your rights.
Quite frankly,
All
I
of you.
represented the American Civil Liberties Union for more than 20 years and all the litigation they had in Alabama. This is an issue that the American Civil Liberties Union ought to be on our side with.
Okay, let's go. Let's bounce.
All right, we got to go. Thank you very much.
Guys, thank you very much.
Sir, on January 6th, you said that all hell would break loose. Did you know that there was going to be violence at the Capitol today?
Steve Bannon pleads not guilty to contempt of Congress. Former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon entered a not guilty plea on Wednesday on 2 counts of contempt of Congress, after he failed to cooperate with a House committee investigating the January 6 storming of the U.S. Capitol. This sets up the first legal showdown over a former Trump advisor refusing to participate in the investigation. Bannon made the plea in a court filing Wednesday, waiving his right to an arraignment that was scheduled for Thursday. Bannon, 67, was indicted by a federal ground jury on Friday on 1 count for failing to appear for a deposition before Congress, and another count for failing to hand over documents. Both were required by a subpoena. On Monday morning surrendered to the FBI in Washington, D.C. He faces up to a year in prison and a fine of up to $1,000 if found guilty of contempt. The committee is likely to pursue contempt charges against former White House Chief Staff Mark Meadows for not cooperating with the investigation. Representative Benny Thompson D. Miss, committee chairman, told Politico that contempt charges are on the table for former Justice Department official Jeffrey Clark, who also ignored his subpoena. The committee this month subpoenaed 16 former Trump officials, legally requiring them to hand over documents and appear for a deposition as part of the January 6 investigation. The officials have a November 23 deadline to turn over documents or possibly face contempt charges. Trump has encouraged his former aides not to comply with the investigation. Bannon is the first person to be indicted for contempt of Congress since 1983.